I started this book to forgive my parents. I ended it by becoming a parent. When I was going off for my road test, my mother said to me, there are two things that look incredibly difficult until you realize that almost everyone does them: driving and having children. It was said in the context of the road test, but I feel like having children seemed to me, it was something I longed for, it was something I was afraid of, it was something I wasn't sure about. I worried about who the children would be. I worried about whether I would be attached to them. And yet, I also had in my mind all the time something else my mother said. And she said it repeatedly. She kept saying, the love for your children is unlike any other love in the world. And if you don't have children, you'll never know. And that would be a real tragedy. At the time that she said it, I was gay. Gay men mostly didn't have children, and I was really angry at her about it, and I wished that she would stop saying it. I thought it was obnoxious, and it was a way of not accepting who I really was. But those words got stuck somewhere in my head, and I always had the thought, but what about that love she was talking about? What about that experience of having children? And while I had my ups and downs with my parents, I really loved my parents, and I thought it would be nice to recreate that degree of intimacy with someone else. So I always had that idea of, but I'd like to have children, but I should have children, but I'll never know if I don't have children. And then when it finally came time, where it seemed like I really could, I felt completely panicked. I thought, I have kind of a nice life, this is going to complicate it terribly. Actually, when they were newborn, I was delighted I'd had them, but also a little uncomfortable with it, and I didn't find babies inherently very interesting, that they were my babies and I would have done anything for them. The day George was born, they said that they thought he might have brain damage. He was born with a knotted umbilical cord, and I suddenly found myself looking at this possibility of entering the demographics I'd been writing about and having a child who was terribly disabled. I felt ready to love him anyway. I felt I knew how much I loved him because I tried not to, because I didn't want to be so hurt by the experience. It then turned out that he was fine. Over the time since then, though, I found myself thinking that that annoying insistence from my mother actually did introduce me to a love that's not like any other. And I sometimes almost think I'm going to wake up and discover I don't really have these children. It's all just some sort of a fantasy or a dream, because while they can be extremely irritating, as children can be, but I just feel as though you hear those words like warmth that people use in describing relationships. It feels to me like it has the physicality of actual warmth. It feels like I'm tethered to the earth in a way that I wasn't before. Tethered to them, it gives me all of these things that we've talked about, a feeling of hope, a feeling of belief, a feeling of transcendence. All of those things come into play. And perhaps having children would have felt that way to me anyway, but perhaps the fact that it was such a long road and that it had so many impediments, that I was so unsure whether I was doing the right thing, has given the joy of it a quality of constant revelation, which I think illumines it even beyond its inherent splendor. I think that for a long time, my sense that the world had been rejecting of me, my sense that my parents weren't completely thrilled about the fact that I was gay, all of these other things had really impeded my ability to relax and be at ease with myself. In studying these families, I saw how hard it is to be a parent, how hard it is to be a parent to a child who's okay, how hard it is to be a parent to a child who's different in some way. And I saw how much battle it took for these families to manage to make it work. And frankly, after I'd seen all of that, I thought my parents did a pretty good job. It somehow made it possible for me to then think, okay, I can do this too. I think I had thought at the beginning, I can't be a parent because what if it's all not perfect? And I ended this up by thinking, it's never perfect, and you do your best. And I've learned a lot from all these other parents about best ways of doing things, and I'm ready to try it myself.